World War II, and he was in the Army Air Corps. So Charles, let me ask you first of all, talk a little bit about your background growing up here in Stratford, and the family, where you grew up, and so forth. Just a little bit about your background.
Well, I lived in Stratford all my life, and I lived at Johnson Avenue by Nichols School, and played a lot of sports, and had that was during the Depression, and we didn't know we didn't have money, but it was a great era, and I lived on Johnson Avenue with all the Swedes, and we got along great together, and like I say, we played a lot of sports, and then I went to Stratford High School.
Before you get to Stratford High, can you tell me who was Miss Merlat?
Oh, my teacher. She was a teacher. Mrs. Merlat was my 6th grade teacher.
At which school?
At Nichols School.
And what did she call you? She had a nickname for you.
Oh, what did she call me?
Was it Little Nutmeg?
My nutmeg, yeah, my little nutmeg, yes.
And you remember her?
Yeah, I remember her.
Fondly, nice teacher?
Oh yeah, they were all nice. And one of the strange things, my 2nd grade teacher was Mrs. Dunbar, who was married to a Walter Dunbar, who was a colonel in the Army. And he was my first boss when I worked in the town hall in engineering. And it's just a funny little side track of what happened.
Could you also mention the firehouse? Do you hang around a firehouse?
Yeah, there was right across the street at the intersection of Johnson Avenue and Nichols Avenue, right across from the Nichols School, was a firehouse. And there was a volunteer firehouse, and Hans Lundgren was, and his father was the chief of the volunteers, and Hans was there, and upstairs was a hall that they had weddings up there, and then there was a little shop attached to the building that there was a shoemaker there, Mr. Schramm, I always remember their names, and markets, meat markets. There was they called Davy Brothers, who became the First National, was right across the street from near the school.
You also, in the summer, you went swimming. What were some of these places you went?
Well, with the swimming, that was another story where we used to walk down to Longbrook Park, and they just made Longbrook Park, and there was a little pool. And it was only about waist deep, but we cooled off, and then we'd walk home, which was over probably a couple of miles, and we got all warmed up walking home again.
Talk about going to high school and maybe some of the teachers are.
Well, in the high school we. There was Earl Flagg, I remember, he was a printing teacher, and I forget the names of some of the other teachers I had, but I remember Earl Flagg because he was a printing instructor, and he was in charge of the band, and did a good job, and everybody knew Earl Flagg.
Didn't you also know somebody by the name of Eddie
Byman, sure, Eddie
what
Byman.
About him, yeah.
Well, Eddie Byman was a very good friend of mine who lived on Johnson Avenue, and he was Swedish, and he became a very good friend of mine, and he became a navigator on a B-24 bomber that flew over the hump during the war, and we bumped into each other in several places. You always bumped into someone from Stratford in the Air Force.
Now, one of your classmates was killed, wasn't he?
John Latanzi was, I think he was a navigator, or I don't know if he was a pilot in a bomber, and he got killed. And very nice fella, and I'll always remember him.
So you graduated in
1943 I graduated, and I joined the Army Air Force at that time at Sterling House. We signed up, a bunch of us signed up there, and they wouldn't call us until we turned 18. So after I graduated, I was 17 yet, so I went and worked for Chance Watt, riveting Corsairs. So I was there for about 8 months or so after I graduated, waiting to be called into the Air Force, and I riveted the fuselage of the Corsair parts of the tail section and the midsection.
so excuse me, but so you wanted to go into the service. Was that a prevalent mood of young men at that time?
Yes, we a lot of people, a lot of us. We went right into the armed forces after graduation, or even before. Some of them went before. You could join the Navy when you were 16, and some of them did that. And
so at that age, what was it compelling you to want to go into the service?
well, it was something we felt that we didn't like what happened at Pearl Harbor, and we wanted to rectify everything. And then you had some bad characters around the world that had to be straightened out, and so most of my friends joined.
So let's talk about where you went. You went to Fort Devens, was it first?
I went to Fort Devens at first. That's where they called me from, and then they assigned us to basic training. And Fort Devens was Massachusetts, and they assigned me to Greensboro, North Carolina, for basic training. And from Greensboro, where you just learned your basics of soldiering and bivouacking or whatever, and then they assigned us to a gunnery school in
it was in Texas, right?
In Greensboro. I'm sorry, no, not Greensboro. Greensboro was the basic.
Was it Harlingen?
Harlingen, Texas.
Right.
That's the very tip of Texas on the Rio Grande. And we went through, and there it's the first time I ever shot a gun. And we shot from a BB gun all the way up to 45s, 22s, shotguns, skeet, and 30 caliber and a 50 caliber machine guns. And so it was quite vigorous training, and we had to learn every part of the machine gun, the caliber 50 machine gun. And I'll always remember the smallest part had the longest name. And I don't remember any of the parts anymore.
You had to be able to assemble them?
Well, you had to be able to take it apart and put it back together, and we did that every day. And then we had to, even blindfolded and with gloves on, we had a field strip of caliber 50, because flying high altitude, it was 60 below zero. You had to have your gloves on, so it was quite an experience. And we had we were like I say, we started off with a BB gun, and then we went to 45s and shotguns. We did a lot of skeet when you became.
But you had not on a plane yet. What point do you get on a plane?
Well, after we learned about the machine guns and how to fire all the other machine guns and whatever, then we got onto a AT-6, and it was an open cockpit, and we'd fly. You had a handheld on like a ring. You would hold a 30 caliber, and you fire between the wing and the tail at these targets down on the water of the Rio Grande. And I remember the fellow before me, he put a hole through the wing and the pilot wasn't too happy. So anyway, and then we started to fly in the B-24, and we would shoot at a sleeve that was towed by a B-26, and they'd have a long sleeve way out, away from the plane, make sure we wouldn't hit the tow plane. And all our bullets, everybody had their own color. And so we could see how we did and when we landed. And we used to gamble a little bit on that score, you know. I held up pretty good.
They didn't give you ratings like marksmanship or expert.
Not with that, no.
Okay.
No.
Now you went from there to Wyoming?
From there, that's where I met my friend Eddie Byman. He was going through the same school I was as a navigator. And then after graduating from Harlingen, most of the gunners were assigned crews. That's where the crews were formed. And I wasn't assigned a crew, but I was in a what do you call it?
Like a replacement?
And a pool.
A pool.
The pool. And we'd have to wait for, and then we were all shipped to Casper, Wyoming. That's where the crews went, and I went with them and was in the pool, and we were training there. Even though we weren't on a crew, we still trained. And then one day I was called in to replace a nose gunner that got killed in a crash on a B. They had about 14 gunners on a B-24 one day, and they all needed so much time in air-to-air gunnery, and so they put a bunch of them on one plane, and unfortunately that crashed, and one of the nose gunners got killed, so I replaced them. And so I went through training with the crew. And
how did they treat you as a replacement?
As a replacement, you can imagine you're taking over a good friend of theirs, and they didn't look up to you as being a replacement, and their good friend is no longer with them. So you can't blame that strange feeling you get, you know. But we went through training, and we I'll always remember we had one more flight, a training flight, 2:30 in the morning briefing, and I didn't feel good. We needed only that one more mission, and then we would be sent overseas.
Okay.
And when I went to sick call, because I didn't feel well, and I remember the flight surgeon, he was a major, and he wasn't too happy because he had to get up 2:30 in the morning. And there was another fella before me, and he didn't examine him at all either, and he just told him to go on up and fly, and he asked me the same thing, and I said, I don't feel good, and he says, you're all right, you look fine, go on up and fly. So we went, we're only 18 years old, and and whatever the flight surgeon said, that's what we did, but I didn't feel well. So anyway, we flew, and while we're flying over in Casper, Wyoming, over the Rocky Mountains in formation. And when you're in formation over the Rockies, the air currents throw you all over the place. You go up 100, 200 feet, down, up and down, you're in formation. The whole crew got airsick. And so we landed right away, and they told us to go to sick call. So we went to sick call, and there's the same flight surgeon. And this time he put a thermometer in my mouth, and he says, why didn't you come to sick call this morning? I could have punched him in the nose. And so he said, you have pneumonia, you have to go to the hospital. So I went to the hospital, and while I was in the hospital, my crew shipped out, and they went over to Italy to the 15th Air Force. And I never heard from him. And so I always said, maybe having pneumonia may have saved my life. I don't know. Whatever happened to him. So anyway, that's what happened. I got on another crew. And this time, he replaced another nose gunner. And I remember the radio operator, his name was Arky. And Arky was from Arkansas. That's why he called him Arky. And he was a veteran of 20, I don't know how many, over 20 missions, I think. And he got shot down over the Pulaski oil fields way at the beginning of the war there. And he bailed out over the Mediterranean. And the next day he was picked up. He was lucky. And he wanted to go over again, which I thought was kind of stupid of him, but that's what he wanted. Well, Arky was a great gambler. He was a little fella. And he won a 1936 Ford. And when I asked Arky one day, would you take me up to Casper Mountain, because a fella that I knew from Stratford, he was a pilot on a B-24, his name was Dick Zorn, and he hit the top of the mountain, got killed with his crew, and I wanted to see where he hit. So Arky took me up to the top of Casper Mountain, and sure enough, you could see where Dick Zorn hit, and if he was up another 100 or 200 feet, he would have missed the mountain. See, in those days, when you were flying in formation and the weather closed in, everybody started to go went to the field, and everybody was trying to land, and so it was pretty hairy. You had to be out the lookout for other planes, and so it was tricky. So anyway, after we finished training again, we were shipped to Lincoln, Nebraska for a couple of weeks to be assigned to wherever we were going to go, overseas or just what. Well, in those days, it was just the beginning of radar bombing. And so our crew was selected to go to Langley Field to pick up a radar operator, which was something new in those days. And so we went to Langley Field, Virginia, and picked up the radar operator, went through training with him on board, and then they had to get rid of one of the gunners, which was me. I was one of the last ones, I replaced the nose gunner. So they got rid of me, and then they went overseas. I don't even know where they went, and then I was shipped to Westover Air Force Base for overseas training again as a pool. And I finally got on a crew and went through that training again, the same training I did in Casper. And we used to fly over Stratford. This was one of our turning points, Stratford, for navigation training. And we hit here and we go down to Langley Field, turn around, go back up to Westover. And one of the crews in our barracks was a veteran crew that had 25 missions, and they were going overseas again, but they still had to go through training again. So I remember it was a pretty big guy. He was a radio operator, and he wanted to get into a ball turret to see how it was, how it felt going about ball turret. That was their crew. And what they tell me, he got into the ball turret, they lowered him down, and then they went over the near the ocean off of Boston and that to shoot at targets and things, and the pilot was going to scare him. So he flew very low with the ball hanging down, and he misjudged and he hit the water, and the ball turret came out, and he got killed. And the plane almost crashed. And the pilot was court-martialed, and they no longer became a crew. So anyway, then we finished training.
Could you mention one more thing
Yeah.
that you had told me? You heard music once.
Oh, that's
Tell
right.
that.
Oh, yeah. I was gonna say, we were flying one night over Boston area, and I didn't have my headset on. I was out in the waist area, and I was hearing music. And I thought, well, I'm looking all around, and what's going on? I'm hearing this music, and I heard it for 30 seconds to a minute, and then it went away. And I told the fellows on the crew, and they thought I was a little batty. But years after the war, I heard a program, and Lucille Ball was on it, and she said she was flying one day in the airline, and she heard music through her teeth, fillings in her teeth, like I did. And it was very interesting. And believe it or not, by Ripley also had it that some people can pick up radio waves like a crystal set through fillings. And that's what I heard. But I only heard it at one time. Strange. So anyway, then we got shipped to California, and to get to California.
That wasn't a pleasant trip, was it?
No, to get to California, that was on a troop train. And that was the craziest ride you ever want to see. We weren't in sleepers. We had to sleep up in a chair, and every town that we stopped at, every little town, and when you looked down the train when we stopped, you could see all the troops running into town to get something to drink, beer or whatever they were drinking, and that was a craziest ride you want to see. And I used to sleep in the mess car underneath a big table that had a shelf, and I used to sleep there at night. It's the only place you get a decent sleep, some sleep. But anyway, on going across country, it was quite a ride, and I remember stopping in Chicago station, and the first thing most of us did was take a shower. We were pretty raunchy. And then we'd stop at the rail yards, and there'd be a freight train, and there was one train, I remember. We all got off, and they opened the door, and there was watermelon. So a couple of guys got up, and they were throwing the watermelon. As we ran past, we caught them, and we took them in the train, and we were going to eat them. Well, the funny part about it, they weren't even ripe. Well, the next station, the MPs were waiting for us. And they said, okay, we need so much money from everybody to pay for the watermelons you stole. So that was quite a trip. So when we ended up in Boise, Idaho, where we were going to be assigned to overseas a bomb squadron, a bomb group, and so we had to pick up an airplane and picked up a brand new B-24, and they told us that we could get a case of liquor apiece. So we had 10 cases of liquor that we put on board the plane. And when we flew overseas to all the islands, all the infantrymen knew that we had liquor aboard, and they used to try to offer us a souvenir of some kind from the Japanese army or whatever. It was quite an experience. But anyway, we started to fly to the South Pacific, and we're on our way to Hawaii, and we're out about on the B-24 to fly that far, which took us 14 and a half hours. You had to have auxiliary gasoline tanks in the bomb bay, which is big rubberized tanks, and they had vents out the side of the plane. And so we were flying to Hawaii, and we're out a good 2 hours, and the smell of gasoline was unbelievable. If anybody struck a match, we would have gone up and smoked. And called the pilot and said, "This is bad news." And he came back, he just wanted to turn back, and I said, "Well, another 2.5 hours to go back, we'd be out, and the gas would be low the ports, and it would probably stop." So that's what we did. We kept going.
If you had put your mask on, would that have stopped the smell?
Well, the smell, it's no, because you could put it into the oxygen, yeah, but it's a smell. But it was very dangerous, and like I say, if anyone struck a match, we'd have gone right up. But so we kept going, and we got out of the waist because it go up front, because that's below the smell, you see. So that's how we got out of the smell. But I remember our bombardier was Patsy Canizio from Long Island, and he had his prayer beads out, and he was praying that we wouldn't blow up. But we got to Hawaii, and we flew over all the mess in Honolulu area. That was a mess. And so then we stayed there for a couple of months. Not months, no, weeks. And then we loaded up, and we took off for New Guinea. And on the way to New Guinea, we stopped at Tarawa and landed there at only one little strip airfield that they captured. And on Tarawa, there wasn't a tree standing. It was so bleak, it was unbelievable. And there was only one blockhouse right in the middle of the island that the Japs made, and it was about 3 feet thick. And there was a direct hit from a big battleship shell that went blew a hole right through. You could walk through the hole. So there was, like I say, there wasn't a tree standing, but you could walk to the next little attached island, and that's where all the natives were. And it always surprised me that the Japs didn't go over to fight from there too, but they didn't. So that's what saved the natives. They stayed in their island, and our troops hit the main island. And I remember a fellow that I went to school with, Aubrey Howell, he got killed on Tarawa, and that was quite a mess. Tarawa was, they miscalculated the tide, and when they left their landing craft, they had to walk through chest-high water with their guns up high, and the Japs plinked them off. And we bombed the heck out of them before. I wasn't there at the time, but I'm saying the bombers, they bombed and shelled that island unbelievably. But the Japs were dug in with coconut trees as their shelter, and that coconut trees could give. It was better than having concrete. And they lived through it, and they really greeted our boys with some heavy fire, and it was a mess. So from there we gashed up, and we went to the next island, Los Negros, I think the name of it was, on our way to New Guinea. And we gassed there, and then we went to New Guinea, small island off New Guinea, and that's where our bomb group and squadron started years before, and so we just followed their trail up. So we stayed there though, but 2 weeks or so, and did a little swimming, and it was very nice R&R there. And then we from there we went to we were flying to the Philippines. Was going to be our next big stop, but we had to stop at an island to gas up in between the Philippines and New Guinea. And on this island there was probably about 5,000 to 10,000 Japanese prisoners, I remember. They were fenced in. And it was an Aussie island, and they told us to, while your planes were getting gassed up, you'd go have some coffee and donuts go through the jungle, and you got a little stand there, and they'll give you some coffee and donuts. And went through the jungle area and came out by the station, the stand, and I looked down, and there's this sailor sitting on a log in his dress uniform, I guess going on R&R, and I looked down at him. I said, Al, what are you doing in a place like that? It was one of my classmates that I graduated with about 10 months before, and he was there, and he looked forlorn there with his hands in his chin in his hands, and we looked up. That was a big laugh, and so then Al become manager of Olson Marine in Stratford years later. But then we took off again to go to Leyte, Clark Field, but our bomb group already moved up to Aishima, right off Okinawa, and so we stayed at Clark Field for a couple of weeks. And all this traveling and time really helped me, because I didn't catch up with the bomb group, so I didn't go on all these missions. So in that way I was fortunate, but we finally got to Aishima, which was a little island was similar to Tarawa, but it had a little mountain in it and on it at one end, and there was tunnels all over the mountains where the Japs were hiding. And Ernie Pyle was at when the Marines took over the island, but they were still fighting. And that's where Tony Bredis from Stratford was a Marine, and he was one of the ones that took over the island with the Marines. And he had, from what I understand, Tony said he had a cigarette with Ernie Pyle. But Ernie Pyle got killed by a sniper a few weeks later, or whatever, and I'll always remember that. And that's where our bomb group was, and we went on a couple of missions, and the atomic bomb was dropped, so we were fortunate that we didn't have to we only flew about 4 missions, and they were what we call milk runs. There wasn't much to them. I don't even think we were fired on. I don't know. But anyway,
where were your missions to?
Well, we were flying to Formosa. There was a Japanese base at Formosa, and along the Chinese. We weren't too far from China. Okinawa wasn't too far from China. But we were about 15, 20 miles from Okinawa, just like Stratford to Long Island. And so while we were there, the war ended. And I remember when they were going to sign the peace treaty, the Japanese ambassadors landed on Aishima, the island, and they had their top hats and their long coats, and they went over to Okinawa to Battleship Missouri, where they signed the peace treaty with MacArthur and all our delegates. And so So we were there at the end of the war, and after the war was over and signed up, the peace treaty was signed. We got to fly to Japan after a month or so, and we went to Tachikawa, where we landed. That's about 30 miles south of Tokyo, and there was a blonde-haired bombardier that went with us just to go to Japan, and he was a real blonde, and he had a haircut in the town there, and he had a big audience. Let me tell you, because he was first time the Japanese ever saw a blonde hair. They all have dark black hair, and that was funny. So that's we back to Aishima, and then we went to Okinawa.
Talk for a minute about food. What were you eating?
Well, we were eating sea rations.
Which are what?
Canned, big cans of food, of chicken.
No hot food then.
Well, we had a mess hall. They built a mess hall out of a Quonset hut type, and the Japanese were used to service the prisoners. And this one little Japanese soldier that was doling out the food. Yeah, there was we had it. They heated that up after the. Yeah, that was heated up. And,
was it safe on the island at night?
Oh yeah.
You weren't worried about security?
No. That was all cleared off after the Marines took it over, and they cleaned off the island. The only thing is they told us to stay out of the mountain there with all the trenches and caves there. It was a terrible smell of dead bodies in there. It was unbelievable. So we didn't go in anyway because of that stench. And but while we were there, we had a typhoon. It was a big typhoon, and I remember all the boats in Buckner Bay and Okinawa. They went out to sea, so they wouldn't crash into each other. And that typhoon, 160 mile an hour winds, and we had squad tents, and we took 2x4s and put where the pegs would hold down the corners of the tent, and it held up, believe it or not, to 160 mile an hour winds, but it leaked like a sieve, and it just went right up against, all around the tent. It went up against the center pole, and we were in our cots, and we were trying to get some sleep with the helmet liners on and the raincoat, and it didn't help too much. Almost being out there without the wind. But most of the tents blew down, and I don't know if I have pictures of the tents. A lot of them are blown down, and then we went over to Okinawa. And
on Okinawa or on any of those islands, did you see any of the USO shows? Was there any entertainment?
Well, there was some entertainment. I forget what we had. There wasn't too much going on at that time. Not at that time. Like I say, we went over to Okinawa and became part of the 8th Air Force. We were in the 15th Air Force in the South Pacific. The 5th Air Force. And the 8th came over after they finished beating the Germans. And we were assigned to an air-sea rescue squadron. I remember we had a B-17, and they put a wooden lifeboat on the bottom, and they drop it like a bomb right out of the plane when anybody went in the ocean. And I don't know how successful they were. I never was on one of those. But we had a helicopter, Sikorsky, I think it was RS5. I think it was a square thing. I think there's a picture there. I think I had one anyway. And I remember one of the helicopter pilots took one of his officer's friends to, had a friend on one of the boats in Buckner Bay, and he wanted to go see him, so he put him in one of these rope
baskets.
Yeah, and lowered him down, and he came and picked him up later after he saw his friend on the battleship or whatever it was. And what happened was this young lieutenant, he was flying in that basket there, and he fell out, and he didn't know how to swim, and he hit the bunk there in the bay, and he drowned. So that was a tragedy, and just from then on, with the war over, what we did on Okinawa was play a lot of sports. We played a lot of football and basketball, and didn't much of it waiting for because the only way you get home, you had to have so many points for being overseas in the battle zone and etc. So when you reach a certain amount, then you could go home. Well, we finally got enough to go home. I did, and we had to go. We didn't fly home. We went on a troop ship, and that was a Admiral class that held, I don't know, maybe about 3,000 or 4,000 troops, and it wasn't too comfortable, and it was very hot, and we were assigned down below. And what I did is we took our air mattresses, and I slept on the deck under a lifeboat, which was comfortable anyway, and because it was an air mattress. And we, instead of going right down to the Panama Canal, we had to get supplies. So we had to go way over to Honolulu to pick up supplies. Unbelievable. And then from there we picked up the supplies, went through the Panama Canal, and that was at least it was interesting going through the canal, and up to New York. It took us 29 days on the water, and it was a boring trip, believe me. And we hit New York, and then from there Camp Dix, I think it was, and then we were up to the place that I took off.
Oh, Massachusetts?
And that's in, what's the name of the...
Was it Warnover or...
The war was over.
Yeah, no, what was the name of the base in Massachusetts?
Where I went originally from,
not Fort Devens, was
Fort
it?
Devens.
Oh, Devens, okay.
We went to Fort Devens and was discharged from there. And...
so you're discharged in Fort Devens, Mass. Yeah. You take the train home? How'd you get
took the train home.
And will you come back to Stratford? And
Stratford to the...
What do you remember?
My same house that I grew up in. And
were they all waiting for you? People waiting for you? Oh,
yeah. That's... they knew we were there, and I called up, and then we went to the... most of the veterans, it was during the summertime there, we joined a 5220 club, they called it, where you could get 52 weeks looking for a job, and they pay you. We got paid so much a month and you could go to school. So that's where I...
And so you decided to go to school?
I went to UB, yeah.
And for what?
For engineering. And when I first went to UB, it was the Junior College of Connecticut, and then, which was a big house on Fairfield Avenue in Bridgeport. And we used to go to the Klein for assemblies and things of that nature. And then that's when it became the University of Bridgeport, and they started to buy up Seaside Park properties. And from that building went down to Seaside Park to become the first time of the Bridgeport U. And all the veterans were there, and that's.
So you got your engineering degree.
Engineering for free, yeah.
And what did you end up doing?
Well, then I went. I went to GE to get a job. I went put an application. They said we didn't have anything in the GE at this time, but we should have in a month or so. So in the meantime, a friend of mine was working in the town engineering department. He said, we have a position open. Why don't you apply? Which I did. And I worked in engineering for a couple of months, and I was enjoying it. And the GE called me up and said, we have a position open for you. But I said, I'm going to stay where I am. And I stayed 40 years with the town of Stratford Engineering Department.
And you met your wife where?
I met my wife down at the Skipper's Restaurant in Lordship. And she was...
And her name is Ruth, what was her name?
Hainsworth. Her name was Ruth Hainsworth from Bridgeport. She graduated from Harding. And so after a couple of years, we got married.
And how many children?
4 children.
And what are your children's names?
Our children is Holly. She got married to a fella up in Boston. They went to Northeastern. That's where they met, and she got married. Never came back home after that. And she has 3 children, and there's Alex and Adri and Evan. And then I have another daughter, Diane Simses. She lives in Lordship, and she has Jimmy, their only child, and I have Chuck. His name is Charles Jr., and he has 2 children, a boy and a girl. He's married to Amy, and Holly's married to Michael Salmon. But Holly kept my last name. I don't know why, but she kept my last name. And Chuck has, he's married to Cynthia, and they have Charles III, and they have a daughter, I can't remember her name. Boy, I get shot. Oh, crap.
We'll come back to it, it's all right.
I can't believe this. And then there's Bobby, my son Bob, who has 2 children. Bobby, his son Bobby, and who's 9 or 10? 9. And their daughter Heather. Oh, Alicia is Chuck's daughter's name. Alicia.
All right. So that brings us up to date.
That brings us up to date.
Right.
And
now, tell me, what is the experience of having served in the war, to end wars, if you will, because the war that saved this country? What do you reflect upon that? How do you feel about that?
Well, the Axis powers were so bad. I mean, the Germans killing all the people, and the Jews, and everybody else, and the Japanese doing the same thing. that's the big reason why we all joined up. I mean, we couldn't let this go on, and I think it was the greatest generation in my era. I mean, it was. I think all the men in that era were joining up. There weren't too many that didn't volunteer.
Well, that about concludes this interview.
Well, thank you so much for asking me for my experiences, and I wish all the veterans a lot of luck, and there aren't too many of us left. I'm going to be 88 in January, and my brother-in-law, Charlie Clark, he was a veteran. He's 90, he'll be 98 next month, and he bowls 3 times a week.
That's terrific. Terrific. Well, thank you for
thank you.
serving our
Thank you,
country. It's a pleasure having interviewed Charles Buynovsky.
Thanks so much.